So today we're going to talk about function families and their characteristics. Now, what makes a function family is when you have a group of functions or graphs that share the same characteristics. In Algebra 1, we're going to talk about four main function families. We're going to talk about linear, we're going to talk about exponential, we're going to talk about quadratic, and we're going to talk a little bit about absolute value. We won't talk about that much except for these first couple days, but we will talk about them and look at them occasionally. The first one we'll talk about will be linear functions. Now, as the name says, linear should remind you of the word line, because a linear function will look like that. Now, every function also has a parent function. It's our parent equation. It's the equation that they're all based on. And for linear, it's y equals x. And you can tell it's linear because of the x. The x has an exponent of 1, and so therefore it is linear. Okay? And an example of actually y equals x, but an example of a graph would be like this, where it is a line. You can see a constant rate of change, and it never starts curves. So no curves and constant rate of change. Some examples of linear functions would be y equals 3x, y equals negative 4x plus 5, or y equals 1/2 x minus 8. Those would all be linear functions. And again, you can tell they're linear functions because of the x with no exponent. Next, we will look at quadratic. Quadratic has a parent function of y equals x squared. And just like before, you can tell by looking at the equation, when you see the 2, that it is quadratic. Anything with the 2, x squared, anywhere in it will make it quadratic. Now, a quadratic equation, when graphed, makes the U shape. And y equals x squared actually looks like this. It has its lowest point at the origin and then opens up. Now, changing the x squared to a negative x squared makes it turn over the other direction and open down, so it could look like that. So if it's negative, it looks like that. Some examples of a quadratic equation would be y equals 3x squared, y equals negative 4x squared plus 8x minus 5, or y equals 1/2 x squared minus 2. Those would all be quadratic equations that we could look at. Next, we'll look at exponential. Now, hopefully you see in the word exponential the word exponent. Unlike the first two, the first linear had an exponent of 1, quadratic had an exponent of 2. For exponential, the x becomes the exponent. So we're going to put this, b to the x. B could be anything, and we'll look at some where the b is 2 or 3 or something like that. But in this case, the exponent becomes the x. And your parent function y equals b to the x. The parent function of an exponential looks kind of like this. It's that swooping one that starts low, like so, and then swoops up, kind of like a flat L or something like that. It can also go down like this. You'll see some versions that look like this. It can also go like this. Okay, so anything that looks like that L doesn't, it only goes one direction, goes up or goes down. Some examples of the equation: y equals 2 to the x, y equals negative 4 to the x, or perhaps even y equals 3 to the x minus 5. But you notice in each case, the x is the exponent. That's what makes it exponential. And our last parent function is the absolute value. And if you remember absolute value, you'll recognize this one. It is simply y to the absolute value of x. And the great thing about absolute value, it's very obvious what it is. It's the V shape. So it looks like this. And if you make it negative, it gets flipped over and looks like this. Some examples of that would be y equals the absolute value of 4x, y equals 5 times the absolute value of x. You can have things on the inside or outside. Or y equals 4 times the absolute value of 2x plus 1. So all those would be variations of that same V shape. So now what I'd like you to do is go to Desmos.com. If you've never used that before, it's a great graphing calculator. But go to Desmos.com, click on Graphing Calculator, and then you're going to plug both or all of these equations in. You can do them at one time. You can put one and delete the other. Linear is probably the easiest, but make sure you type in the entire thing. Y equals x. There's a little keyboard that you can use if you want to, and then I want you to come back and sketch these. So like for y equals x, when you graph it, you're going to sketch it, and it's going to look just like that. And then you'll do that for the rest of them. And then you're going to go do the quadratic, and you'll do the same thing. Go to Desmos, and you'll type them in, y equals x squared. To type in the x squared, there's a little keyboard on Desmos. You can click on it, and you're going to look for one of two things. You can either look for the a squared, which allows you to type in. So you type in y equals x, and then you type in the box that says a squared. Or you can look for the one that says a to the b, in which case you would type in y, and then equals, and then x, and then you type the a to the b, and then 2. And that would, either way, would give you x squared. So I want you to do that. Type each one of those, and you should get your nice U shapes and variations of that. When you get to the exponential, same thing, except you're going to type in y equals 2, and then you will have to type in the a to the b button, and then type in x, and it'll end up with this. Just make sure when you're done with it, make sure when you graph it, it looks like this. And if it does, then you're doing the right thing. So just kind of match it up to make sure you're doing the right way. And finally, when you do absolute value, you're going to do the same thing. You'll type in y equals, but if you look at the bottom of the keyboard, you'll see something that looks like this. Hit that button and then type x or whatever you want inside the absolute value, and then you can hit enter and it'll go ahead and graph it for you. Okay? So go through, graph them all. We'll check them as soon as we come into class. That's how we'll check the work, is I'll put this up on the board, or up, not the board actually. I'll put it on the shared screen, and you can check your work to make sure you're doing it correctly. So be sure to graph and sketch each one of them as nicely as you can so you have a good set of notes. All right, see you in class.